I'm Agent Morris with the NSA.
There is something real here.
Did you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the first-hand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General. Biologics came to some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Those could represent exquisite new adversary technology.
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
The government is covering up some level of its knowledge and understanding about what some of those things are.
The Sol Foundation, which just announced a new initiative for UFO research and policy.
It's nuts, man. I mean, we're just small-town buds who saw a UFO in the woods. I mean, now we're hanging out with the government.
Wow. What floor were you guys on?
Hello and welcome to another edition of Anomaly Now, straight out of Austin, Texas. I'm your host, Smiles Lewis. This is the weekly, sometimes live, news and media roundup for the 501c3 nonprofit Scientific Anomaly Institute, aka the Anomaly Archives, located here in Austin, Texas, and via the metaverse, via the internet, and your dreams. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you tuning in live or Memorex, listening to the audio-only version of the podcast, or watching this video version. We really appreciate your support. Please like and subscribe, hit the notification bell. All that good stuff really helps us grow. And you can find out more about us, of course, at our website, anomalyarchives.org. We have a Patreon webpage at patreon.com/anomalyarchives, where you can subscribe for free or donate on a monthly basis at various levels. Anything and everything is of great support to us, even if it's free. We offer as much new content as we can, including live monthly online presentations that you can participate in. And there's a growing back catalog of material there. So check that out. Of course, we on this program typically are covering a wide variety of news articles relative to the variety of subjects covered by the Anomaly Archives, all things anomalous, consciousness, parapsychology, Forteana, the occult, the metaphysical, cryptozoological, ufological, uapological, UFOs, UAP, everything in between. Right on, let's get to it. You can follow along with these news links at our Flipboard. That's flipboard.com/@anomalyarchives. And there you can click through and find a long, ever-flowing page of links, thousands and thousands of articles. We hope you'll check that out. Not going to get to everything, of course, we never do, but there's just so much information to review, read, critique, that sort of thing. Well, let's dive right in, but also I just want to also thank my good friend David, who hosted the 4th Alien Beers and Cheers meetup. That's a meetup.com group for the Austin Disclosure meetup that he's organizing. I had a great time, met some new folks, heard some new UFO stories, and just generally had a relaxed evening over drinks, talking about all things weird, all things UFO related. And there's just so many directions one can go when talking about UFOs. Other things that might interest you, there are, of course, free online webinars from the wonderful IONS, the Institute of Noetic Science, over at their website, noetic.org/experience/connections-live, or just do a internet search for IONS Connections Live. They've got some upcoming live webinars that might interest you. This Friday, July 25th, The Energy of People, Places, and Spaces, a conversation with Garrett Yount. That looks to be very interesting. Coming up August 1st, Jump Time is Now, Cultural Shifts and Spiritual Intelligence in the Century Ahead. And many others there, as well as free video replays from that website. You'll want to go check that out. Another upcoming free online conference, UFO conference, is the Anomaly-NOW, a virtual conference on the Anomalous put on by Ryan Sprague of what's the Search the Sky. I'm sorry, Ryan. I can't remember the name of your podcast, but Ryan is a wonderful up and comer in the UFO scene who was one of the contributors to the 2017 or thereabouts, I forget when it came out, the book that the UFO anthology that I and Greg Bishop and Joshua Cutchin and Kirk Collins and Chris Rutkowski and Ryan Sprague and so many others were a part of, featured in Susan Demeter St. Clair. So many great things in that. But anyway, Ryan does a great podcast and also has been putting on this Anomaly-NOW conference for the last 3 years, and you can find links to that here over at Anomaly-NOW.com. Some of the great speakers coming up: Shayna Stangus, Jean and Natalia Stico. But what I'm really interested in, there's Mitch Horowitz, Christina Gomez. These are all great folks. What I'm really looking forward to is our friend Paul Kimball, filmmaker and television host, and what is he, cousin to Stan Friedman? I forget. Uncle Stan, as he says. Paul Kimball is going to be giving a talk called Fascism, Anti-Semitism, and the Corruption of Ufology by the Far Right. Wow. Okay, that should be interesting. And many other speakers and presenters. Check that out over at Anomaly-NOW.com. So before we jump into a lot of UFO news, let's have some fun here. Over at CornwallLive.com, unicorn skull, quote unquote, discovered at St. Nectan's Glen near Tintagel. I don't know if I'm saying these places, pronouncing them correctly. St. Nectan, Nectan, Nectan's Glen near Tintagel. Tintagel? Tintagel. Quote, I imagine that some people think the story isn't true, said John after the incredible discovery in one of Cornwall's most mystical areas. Then he traded it for a few pints of beer. Well, of course he did. Why wouldn't you? Let's see. A family made a remarkable discovery while on holiday in Cornwall when they stumbled upon what looked like a unicorn skull. John Goodwin and his family from Canada were staying near Tintagel when they found the unusual skull with a horn at St. Nectan's Glen, a waterfall area already considered magical by thousands of visitors. About halfway through a walk around the waterfall, which is also considered to be a sacred and spiritual site, his daughter spotted something sticking out of a mossy bank. John said he figured it was a root, but when he pulled it free, it turned out to be a skull with a horn growing straight out of the middle. Yes, there is a picture, which you can see over here at CornwallLive.com. I pulled it out and thought it must be a deer or something at first, but realized it only had one horn. It was too small for a rhino, but no matter what, it was unusual. It was real bone, heavy, and looked properly old. We brought it back to the car, but my gran started feeling uneasy right away. She said it didn't feel right to take it, like we'd disturbed something meant to be left alone. The family then decided to take it to the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Boscastle to see if the skull might be of interest to them. However, he said it was deemed not to be a magical item and instead was reportedly labeled as a freak animal. And there is the picture there. That is a big horn on whatever the heck that is. With their questions left unanswered, John said they took the skull back to the boot of their car, the trunk. While he is still unsure exactly what animal the skull belonged to, he said his gran thinks it might be from the Unicorn Merlin Road at the Battle of Badon. Of Baden, given the area's links to the legend of King Arthur, including Tentacle Castle. Quote, I imagine that some people think the story isn't true, but yes, it is. Anyway, they also say it is certainly possible that some trickster put it there at some point. I call it the Sadie James skull in honor of my gran and gramp who had their 50th anniversary last weekend. So anyway, of course, the coincidence of this discovery with the recent release, I don't know, a couple months back, of the horror action thriller about a family killing a unicorn and then the unicorn getting its revenge. That's kind of funny and interesting. Is it a viral stealth marketing ploy? Who knows? But it reminds me that there are what are considered quote unquote real unicorns in the form of goats that have been raised to have one horn. And I was aware of this before, but I was also made aware of it by Jacques Vallée in his Forbidden Science journals, where he talked about his good friend's pagan magician Oberon Zell. And in fact, over at iflscience.com, I'm not going to tell you what IFL stands for. iflscience.com had an article a couple years back, The People Who Made Farm Animals into quote-unquote Real Unicorns, a tale of myths, biology, and goats. And yes, here are some pictures of their lovable little goats with one horn. And the article starts by saying, quote, the experiment was successful. The animal, now 2.5 years old, bears upon the forehead the stamp of the once fabulous unicorn. Biologist Dr. W. Franklin Dove wrote of a young bull in his 1936 research paper titled Artificial Production of the Fabulous Unicorn, a Modern Interpretation of an Ancient Myth. And this article does specifically reference Oberon Zell. And the article says, Dove's experiments would then inspire Oberon Zell, a self-proclaimed transpersonal psychologist, metaphysician, naturalist, theologian, shaman, author, artist, sculptor, lecturer, teacher, and ordained priest of the mother goddess, the Earth Mother Gaia, to create a unicorn flock of his own. Using his college-level biology knowledge, Zell crossbred Angora and Saanen goats to get the idea base for his horn sculpting. Again, all of this I was aware of because of his mention in Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science journals. And sure enough, a good friend, RPJ, Red Pill Chunky, Miguel Romero, over at the Daily Grail, who has been publishing various of his sketches that were inspired by things mentioned in Jacques' journals. In this post, Forbidden Sketches, hand-drawn artwork inspired by the published journals of Jacques Vallée, Volume 5. There is, in fact, his inspiration of Oberon Zell Ravenheart. And he notes, I made him look like Sean Connery. Oberon Zell Ravenheart, one of Jacques' oldest friends and a practicing pagan magus. Anyway, all that's fun if you ask me. Moving right along to the UFO news. So yeah, Canada. Blame Canada. This one out of the Government of Canada website, ised-isde.canada.ca, Management of Public Reporting of Unidentified Aerial Phenomena in Canada. Report of the Sky Canada Project from the Office of the Chief Science Advisor of Canada, June 2025. There is a hyperlinked table of contents that ranges from, of course, introductory materials outlining their objectives, the background, UAPs and science, from UFOs to UAPs, evolving terminology and broadened scope, to Section D, UAPs and the public, misinformation and disinformation in the public dialogue on UAPs, and many other subsections, methodology and findings, global perspectives, recommendations to enhance UAP reporting and research in Canada, conclusions and appendices and endnotes, etc., etc. Yeah, this is a great, pleasant surprise out of Canada. Some rational things do come out of that place north of here. It's no surprise to some of us. There's been some interesting reporting in the UFO scene. There has been over at Sentinel News. That's Baptiste Friscourt's site. Canada's full report on UAP recommends the establishment of a dedicated service. In a rare move, the Office of the Chief Science Advisor of Canada published its full analysis of the scientific efforts regarding the investigation of UAPs. And yeah, you can read that over at sentinel-news.org. Lots of excerpts and quotes. And meanwhile, over at ctvnews.ca, that is one of the Canadian TV network's website, Canada's top scientist releases new UFO report. Here's what you need to know, by Daniel Otis, which was released on July 14th and updated on July 17th. But I did want to play this bit from our good friend Chris Rutkowski, who got some interview. I'm not going to play the whole clip. It's about 6 minutes long. Of course, the link will be in the show notes, and you can watch the entirety of it later. But here is a few minutes of that.
Ottawa's top scientist has released a report on UFOs. It recommends the government establish a new federal agency to collect and investigate UFO sightings. Here to talk about what an agency might do and why it might be useful is Chris Rutkowski. He is a science writer and author of Canada's UFOs Declassified. Good to have you with us tonight from Winnipeg, Chris. You hear that from a top scientist in this country, that we should have a federal agency looking at this, and you think what?
I think it's a good idea. It's been more than 30 years since the Canadian government has had an office where people could report things seen in the sky. And, science is taking the subject a lot more seriously, and Canada's science community has played a big part in so many factors and so many other genres. Why not this one?
How many UFO sightings would there be annually in Canada? Do we know?
Well, this report did use my own data, which we produced with the Canadian UFO Survey every year. Somewhere between 750 and 1,000 separate UFO reports, or UAP reports, depending on how you'd like to use them these days. But they come from coast to coast to coast, from average citizens to pilots, air traffic controllers, RCMP. If you've seen one, you're in good company. Something like 1 in 10 Canadians believe they've seen a UFO.
And what would a central body do? Why would it be useful?
Well, right now, it's not even clear where to report something. If you've seen something, Transport Canada accepts reports from pilots, and there are quite a few reports from pilots. The RCMP at one time used to collect information and investigate cases on behalf of the National Research Council. The National Research Council moved on to the Canadian Space Agency, which is now more focused on Canadarms and involvement with space exploration. So not as involved anymore. There's not really a place to report them. So even collecting the cases is quite a challenge.
So if you had a body or a federal agency for UFOs, would you put that under the Canadian Space Agency, and would that go a great distance to lend credibility to the study of these?
Well, the Sky Canada project suggested that the Canadian Space Agency might be the place to do it. The trouble is that most people who see objects in the sky say that they're very close to them, close to the ground in some cases. And that's a long way from space, so it may not be the best body. And yet, right, scientific expertise says, we need something. Also, the fact that a lot of cases are reported, with regard to national defense. We've had things shot down by American jets. Another Chinese spy balloon was shot down off the east coast of the United States. And that suggests there's something going on in our atmosphere rather than anywhere else. So out of context of, defense and safety for passengers and as well for science, we have to have something contributing to the community here in Canada.
Chris, what would this do?
All right. You can watch the rest of that over at YouTube or on the website of that news broadcast. Well, of course, again, the links for that and all the other items covered in tonight's show are going to be at anomalyarchive.org. In our video archives pages, we have a separate page for every episode of Anomaly Now with all the news links covered therein. So, in other UFO news, my good friend Greg Bishop is the recently featured guest on an episode of American Alchemy hosted by Jesse Michaels. Of course, I've mentioned this show many times on Anomaly Now, and while I have expressed my concerns about Jesse Michaels' connections to Peter Thiel and this wave of certain types of shows like this, I do really actually find Jesse Michaels to be a real firebrand in the modern current UFO scene. He really has devoured so much information and is kind of a walking encyclopedia on the subject, and has on very interesting and important guests, and seems to be making some very important connections within the historiological UFO movement. And it is wonderful that my good friend Greg has now been a guest on the show. Highly recommend it. Of course, Greg is the author of Project Beta, about the creation of a modern UFO myth via the disinformation campaigns of AFISI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and their agent, Richard Doty, among other possible, probable three-letter agencies that were involved in this disinformation campaign against Paul Benowitz. Anyway, it's a very, very good interview. Highly recommend it. You can, of course, watch that over at YouTube. It is titled Fake, quote-unquote, Alien Signals Drove Him Insane, featuring Greg Bishop. drove him insane is, of course, a reference to Paul Benowitz. And in a nutshell, Paul Benowitz was a electrical engineer who had many business relationships with the military and whose business and home were literally, practically, depending upon which house or office you're talking about, next to Kirtland Air Force Base, where he started seeing very strange light phenomena and started recording very strange electromagnetic signals. And when he did his duty as an American and contacted the base, instead of telling him, don't worry about it, we've got it under control, whatever, and they encouraged him to consider his existing beliefs in extraterrestrials and UFOs, and did other things to drive him over the edge. But yeah, you can find that over at Jesse Michael's American Alchemy YouTube channel. Highly recommend that. Meanwhile, there has been a obituary published online for Ray Stanford, Ray Dene Stanford. We, of course, mentioned his passing in a previous episode. There's a very nice, lengthy obituary memorial for him over at legacy.com. He was 86 years old and passed away on June 14th. Ray is very well known, even both. He is a very controversial figure in the UFO scene for having supposedly photographed more UFOs than anybody else, including moving picture film. He had a very elaborate attempted civilian scientific research facility west of Austin, here in Austin, Texas, called PSI, Project Starlight International. But he also dabbled and went headlong into channeling and more esoteric type stuff. But in his later years, he focused on fossil hunting and seemed to be as successful, if not more successful, at finding fossils that others had not. And he actually gained some very significant clout as a fossil hunter. And you can find many links to that online if you just search for Ray Stanford and fossils. He is a fascinating figure, and his legacy should be preserved and will be. Meanwhile, there has been, as always, controversy and rumors flowing, this time around former deputy director of AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, Tim Phillips, who we talked about, who has been making the rounds, doing a number of UFO UFO podcasts as a guest. Well, some interesting developments have happened. First of all, I didn't realize that when I was referring to him as the former deputy director, that he had been dismissed from his service to AARO, seemingly back in early May, as the result of getting in trouble, perhaps. As one can discover on our webpage, we've archived some of this material, but Christopher Sharp of Liberation Times back on May 2nd wrote that Tim Phillips is no longer the deputy director of AARO. He was quoting DoD and AARO spokesperson Susan Goff, who we've mentioned many times. And she said, and his views expressed on LinkedIn are his own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DoD or the U.S. government. And then, so on July 18th, Stephen Greenstreet, who, while I respect some of his reporting, has the tendency to be very unjournalistic and publish rumors as if they are fact without properly vetting or giving attribution to their source. But all that aside, sometimes he seems to provide leads to the UFO community, even as he derides them so assiduously. But on July 18th, he posted on X, Tim Phillips has been fired effective today. Phillips, the former deputy director of AARO, the Pentagon's UFO office, recently did a handful of public interviews, exclusively first with me, regarding his discoveries while at AARO. He was then contacted by ODNI Counterintelligence, ordering him to stop doing interviews without DoD approval until his official retirement in October 2025. But today, Phillips received a termination letter from ODNI HR. The DNI terminated his federal government employment effective today, July 18th. No details were provided and no appeal was allowed. Phillips states, quote, "I was surprised by this action, but senior executives serve at the pleasure of the president. After 45 years of honorable military government service, often in very dangerous places, I thought I would have an opportunity to discuss why I was terminated." And yeah, so, and then the next day, Stephen Greenstreet followed up that with corroborating something I had found on my own over at Timothy Phillips' LinkedIn page. Today, Phillips posted about his early retirement on LinkedIn. Back in April, Phillips was given deferred resignation, DRP, as part of the Trump administration's Department of Government Efficiency DOGE efforts. That's news to me, but, and again, it would be nice to have some confirmation of this perhaps from Phillips. In May, Phillips did an exclusive interview with me at the New York Post and told me he was, quote, "no longer under the tyranny of the DOD's Public Affairs Office," unquote, and was thus allowed to do public interviews. Phillips went on to do 5 more public interviews, mostly with UFO-centric personalities, but apparently his interviews raised counterintelligence red flags within ODNI, and on July 10th, he was asked to stop all interviews and moving forward to get approval from the DOD. 1 week later, July 18th, he was terminated, essentially forced into retirement 2 months early. Now, of course, this begs so many questions. Is this, in fact, true and accurate? If you read Tim's LinkedIn announcement about his no longer being employed, there's nothing there to indicate that it was done in some untoward fashion. He opens by saying, "Yesterday was my last day as a federal government employee after combined 45 years. He talks about the awards that he had received, and he had received significant awards, especially for his work with Arrow as the transitioning deputy director, but nothing validating or verifying the quotes attributed to him by Stephen Greenstreet. Now, I'm not accusing Greenstreet of fabricating those quotes, but it sure would be nice to get some clarity here. But yes, it begs the question, what was so disagreeable about his public statements after he was no longer even an active employee, but had not yet retired, when he was speaking out publicly about Arrow and its activities and his work there and UFO UAP reports. Our good friend Micah Hanks over at micahhanks.com/podcast, his July 22nd podcast episode, Shadows in the Data, UAP sighting, stealth craft, and DOD quote-unquote silencing, briefly addresses this among other topics, but he does cover this, and we are in agreement that it sure would be nice to get some confirmation here, but it is very interesting and intriguing to know if there's something specific about what Mr. Phillips said in these appearances that is of possibly specific concern to the Department of Defense. Who knows? But yes, you can go over to anomalyarchives.org. We have a page for Tim Phillips and links to a lot of this material. And meanwhile, in other UFO-related news, there's this interesting article from July 16th. Dr. Harley Rutledge and his project identification for UFOs. I love this kind of historical overview of people that I think are very significant in the UFO history. This is at a website called pressreader.com. Oh, it's from the Pea Ridge Times. I'm guessing this is like a local newspaper aggregator, or maybe it's the platform that this Pea Ridge Times, possibly physical print newspaper, does their digital version, or maybe it's all digital. I'm not really sure. But the writer Mark Cumming, with a K, writes, "Back in 1984, I was a young college student enrolled at Southeast Missouri State University at Cape Girardeau. I signed up for a required physical science class. My instructor was physicist Dr. Harley Rutledge. Dr. Rutledge was a kind man with a good sense of humor, and it was evident he loved science and that he had an entertaining way of teaching the class." But you can, of course, you can go to this link and read the rest of that, read the entire article there. Some other things I want to bring your attention to. Our friend Tim Banal over at coasttocoastam.com reports, bill to create state UFO commission fails to pass in New Hampshire Congress. I had been unaware of this, so thank you, Tim, for bringing this to our attention. An ambitious bill to create a state commission on UFOs sadly failed to pass during New Hampshire's latest congressional session. According to a local media report linked there, the resolution was put forward by Rep. Aidan Ankerberg at the start of the year and called for the establishment of a special group tasked with collecting, quote, reports and testimony regarding unidentified anomalous phenomena in the state, unquote. A subsequent hearing of the New Hampshire of the New Hampshire House of Representatives Science, Technology, and Energy Committee, which was tasked with debating the merits of the bill, saw the concept receive something of a mixed reaction. One advocate for the commission, Rep. John Cloutier, remarkably revealed that, quote, long ago I had a questionable sighting that with physics I cannot explain. Noting that he was not alone when it came to having such an experience, he mused that, quote, now we have citizens, be it 1 or 1,000, who have come before us with things in the sky, unquote. Ultimately, Cloutier argued that the state needed its own UFO commission because, quote, there's no one right now who can take testimony or evidence, whatever it may be, unquote. Among those who opposed the peculiar piece of legislation was Rep. Michael Harrington, who offered something of a scathing review of the idea. Quote, what has this got to do with the function of the state of New Hampshire and our authority to go after UFOs? He asked, grousing, I just think this is a total waste of time and effort. Alas, the bill's critics prevailed as the committee gave it a thumbs down, which led to its defeat in a subsequent House vote. That is over at coasttocoastam.com, and there are 2 links in the article to local source material. Meanwhile, over at CUFOS.org, that is the Center for UFO Studies, this is the J. Allen Hynek Center that he created back in the day, and which is still around in some small part, and they have recently begun publishing more online material, and one of their longtime investigators, researchers, Michael Swords, who used to write a very prolific blog, has published I think it's now a 4-part series called Peeking into the Corners of 1952. This looks to be very extensive, and I must say, again, CUFOS is one of those, and now they're working with David Marler in New Mexico with their now joint new HR in UFO HRC, National UFO Historical Records Center. A fantastic new nonprofit that has the most number of UFO reports of any organization in North America, possibly in the world. But yes, there are 4 parts to this series that Dr. Swords has written, and looking forward to diving into that. Meanwhile, another prolific blogger, Keith Basterfield, along with Pauline Wilson, has written several new articles over at his UFOs-scientificresearch.blogspot website, officially titled Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Scientific Research. One of the more recent articles is from late June. There was a BASS OSAP administrator before, Robert Bigelow. He says, I've been reading the recently released Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, BASS, Advanced OSAP document, BASS 10-month report dated July 30th, 2009. There are a number of pieces of information which, despite my deep interest in blogging about the BASS OSAP, I was previously unaware. I will be publishing a series of blog posts about these. He goes on to say, the first BASS monthly report. On page 3 of the 10-month report, there is reference to the first BASS monthly report dated October 2008, discussing the time period from September to October of that year. It states that during that time, BASS had only 2 employees, namely Robert Bigelow and senior analyst John Schuessler, where Schuessler, as an aside, used to be the head of MUFON for a time. Who was this individual? Who was this individual who resigned? Oh, it says, in September 2008, a BASS administrator was hired, but shortly thereafter resigned. Who was this individual who resigned? The answer is to be found in Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science, Volume 5, page 428. In a diary entry dated August 24th, 2008, Vallée writes, quote, a NASA manager named Al Holt has been approached to lead the BASS project. Anyway, you can read more about this, but this gets also to the value I have repeatedly stated that can be found in Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science journals. They are a wealth of information from behind the scenes of historical details from his life and the life of so many others in the UFO field. And that obviously is helping decipher information that is being leaked out in the case of this Bass OSAP report that was leaked onto the internet a month or so ago, and which is thankfully now helping reveal, as Vallée's book did in and of itself, more and more of this ufological history that I know we're all fascinated with. Moving right along, over at the SUAP's website, that's the Society for UAP Studies.org, they have announced this new project, Aura-Upward, this Society for UAP Studies flagship strategic research initiative. And this is a overview of this new project of theirs. Aura is SUAP's operational system for managing anomaly research from submission to closeout. It turns fragmented inquiry into a structured, trackable process, embedding accountability and scientific rigor at every phase, allegedly. Features, project lifecycle phases, 7 lifecycle phases adapted from leading aerospace industry best practices. They list from phase 1, concept development, to phase 6, closeout and integration, with things like detailed design and funding alignment to research execution, etc. And there is a place to submit a proposal, and there is a subpage with more information. Features research readiness levels, milestone-based governance, flexible by design. Yeah, very curious to see more on this and where it goes. Whereas, so that was Aura. Well, then there was Upward. This is SUAP's meta-scientific infrastructure, the system that ensures research findings aren't just completed, but connected. It integrates outputs from Aura and affiliated research into a shared framework for building cumulative insight. Core functions, institutional knowledge map, a living visual map of all SUAP's affiliated research, which shows relationships between projects, domains, and emerging hypotheses. Core functions, cross-project synthesis. Upward curates research into thematic white papers, comparative models, and meta-analyses, which then allows the epistemic integration team to identify recurring patterns, gaps, and signals across disciplines, something that is typically left unexplored by research institutions. And almost everything I'm saying here, there is a link that says read more that presumably leads to a separate web page with more information. Anyway, should be interesting. SUAPs is doing some good stuff. They have also a YouTube channel where they've recently released some more videos of interviews and discussions about these subjects. Michael Sifone, who's the main powerhouse behind SUAPs, the Society for UAP Studies, really has a keen academic eye and is very much interested in elevating the discourse on the subject of UFOs and UAP to a much more high-level academic level. Meanwhile, over at thedebrief.org, Micah Hanks reports on, you may have heard about this, 30,000 plus acre quote-unquote Gothic fire scorches military training range near Nevada's secretive Area 51. Yeah, this is pretty wild, but given the increasing breadth and devastation created by these wildfires across the United States and indeed the world due to climate change, it's no surprise that they would get very close to, and on the actual secret ranges of government secret facilities. In this case, the article begins, a massive wildfire raging near Area 51, a mysterious and highly classified U.S. Air Force facility in the Nevada desert, continues to burn its way across the Nevada test and training range, according to federal officials. Known as the Gothic Fire, the blaze is believed to have been ignited by lightning on July 4th and has scorched more than 36,000 acres in its expansion across the sensitive military training area over the last 2 weeks. After growing over the course of several days with no containment, Bureau of Land Management, BLM, officials reported on Wednesday that the fire has now been reduced to roughly 30,786 acres and is 10% contained. This just breaks my heart to hear this kind of devastation. Thankfully, this isn't in a highly populated area as far as humans, but obviously the ecosystems that are being burned are being devastated. And while obviously wildfires are a natural part of any ecological system, it's very disconcerting to see these kinds of blazes becoming so much more common and so much more devastating. But yeah, interesting that this is happening right now near there. Well, maybe that's not, the timing isn't interesting, but I juxtapose that with this other article, which has also been reproduced at other news outlets. But over at Unilad, that's UNILAD.com, is this headline: former Area 51 staff claim they're suffering life-threatening consequences from working at top secret base. Yes, indeed. As we have reported before, the former Area 51 staffers and employees are still battling the government to try and get compensated for the terrible conditions that have seemingly caused them to have life-threatening illnesses for so many years. Yeah, this is something that we've covered before and does thankfully come up every once in a while. Not sure if maybe the writers on this are trying to leverage this news coverage about the fires. Certainly wouldn't blame them for doing so, but in some cases, it's my understanding that some of these staffers, the reason that they likely got sick was similar to, I think, how military personnel in the Middle East got sick, I believe, during the first Gulf War, when they were made to burn materials that created very toxic fumes that they unfortunately could not avoid from inhaling, and likely did not have the proper gear to protect them from those fumes. Moving right along towards the end of our UFO section, here is part 2 of a series over at thunderbirdphoto.com. This one titled The Ghost Light of Prickly Pear. It references its previous article. It's part 1, but Charles Tack, T-A-C-K-E, was killed with an axe to the skull. Yikes! His body was found in a manger covered in lime. After his murderer was brought to justice, Tack's alleged spirit returned nightly to haunt his former ranch. So this is about a strange light phenomena at this place called Prickly Pear that is associated with the demise, the murder of somebody. And this goes to what I often tell people when trying to talk about the subject of UFOs, that it is one of the most common folk beliefs across all cultures across this planet. That is the idea that balls of light often represent the spirits of the dead, or our ancestors, or various metaphysical beings, angels, demons, ghosts, what have you. This is a very old belief system, and there's likely, I think, something to it. Now, what is the actual case in this particular situation? I don't know, but you can read parts 1 and 2 over at thunderbirdphoto.com. Oh, I meant to mention this earlier. Okay, so in the context of aforementioned Stephen Greenstreet, sorry, this is out of order. I forgot to rearrange my slides here. Yeah, so Stephen Greenstreet, of course, it produces these often vitriolic, but sometimes very informative videos. He's for the New York Post, where he works. And the New York Post obviously has the reputation of being a less than reputable news outlet there in New York. But again, you know, a broken clock is right twice a day kind of thing. But again, he often puts out little tidbits that, if properly vetted and sourced, might be very significant and interesting. And I do always learn something from his videos, even if I disagree with his approach to them. It's very much like a scandal rag, sadly. But one of his latest allegations is towards the end of a new video he's put out called The Pentagon's Ghostbusters: Rogue Military Officials Hunted UFOs, Ghosts, and Monsters. And it's a continuation of his exposés on the OSAP, ATIP, BASS, Pentagon UFO program, which, as he and others have argued, was not less of a UFO program and more of a paranormal poltergeist haunting research program out at Skinwalker Ranch, then owned by billionaire Robert Bigelow. And that in some have suggested that this whole 2017 onward campaign of couching the ATIP program as a UFO Pentagon program was a way to distract from the less savory investigations avenues that were actually being investigated. And it basically focuses on and suggests that the senators, representatives, as they became aware of the funding of this project, became angry, and that's why it lost its funding and support. All of which may or may not be true, some or all, but there's some very interesting bits of information that he draws on and has reported on and talks about. But his latest claim towards the end of this Pentagon's Ghostbusters video is where he cites the Department of Defense Aero Office's report on the historical record of U.S. government involvement with UAP, Volume 1, February 2024, which, if I'm remembering correctly, this is the terribly edited, error-riddled report that so many of us have criticized. And in it, as you can see in this screen capture from the end of his Pentagon's Ghostbusters video, is a section titled Unnecessary IC Program Expansion. And if you search for that in the document, you'll come across, yes, if you go to the website, you can link to the PDF of the actual report. And if you search it, you'll see there is, in fact, a section on page 35, Unnecessary IC Program Expansion, which says, Aero confirmed the existence of one IC cap that's intelligence community compartmented, or rather controlled access program, CAP, that was unnecessarily expanded in 2021 to include a UAP reverse engineering mission. Again, what they're saying is that they did find a program that was trying to reverse engineer UFOs, UAP. And they're saying that it was unnecessarily expanded to do so in 2021. It goes on to say this program was expanded despite the lack of any evidence or mission need to justify the expansion. The appropriate congressional committees were notified. This program never recovered or reverse engineered any technology, let alone off-world spacecraft. This controlled access program, CAP, was disestablished due to its inactivity, absence of mission need, and lack of merit. Now, why is this significant? Because in this video by Stephen Greenstreet, he, without giving any explanation, attributes this unnecessarily expanded program in 2021 to none other than David Grush, the alleged whistleblower who, of course, has testified before Congress back in 2023. So if anybody out there has knowledge of what Greenstreet is talking about, how he's linking this, I mean, I as with everything else in this report, there's so many things like this where I'm like, well, what are they talking about? There's no footnote or citation to give a point of reference to what they're reporting here. So what do we make of that? I don't know. All right. Moving into the very final neck of the program here are just a few more things. There's a couple of interesting links that you might find worthy of your attention. SciPost, that's psypost.org. The latest psychological and neuropsychological, the latest psychology and neuroscience discoveries is the subtitle of the website. Back in June, they had this article, Ayahuasca Entity Encounters Linked to Lasting Religious Belief Changes, especially in Men. This by Vladimir Hedry over at, like I say, psypost.org. And this research was published in the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs. Not really sure about the validity of this research, but it is intriguing. Of course, anybody who knows me knows I have a love for good old Terence McKenna. And of course, he was the main person who, as the kind of Timothy Leary of the 90s, Timothy Leary being the LSD guru of the 60s and 70s and previous, Terence McKenna was the Timothy Leary of the 1990s, promoting drugs like psychedelic mushrooms, psilocybin, and DMT. And of course, he created the phrase elf-infested spaces to describe the realm that he said and others reported could be accessed by utilizing the psychedelic DMT, which naturally occurs in the human brain and occurs naturally in a variety of plant species, and which was researched legally allowed by the government and likely funded by it, by the famous researcher Rick Strassman, who published his work in a book called DMT, the Spirit Molecule. Now, there's also this article over at coincider.com. This one, for some reason, wouldn't flip over into the Flipboard, but I will provide the link in the show notes. This one's by Bernard Bateman, MD, from July 9th. Introducing DMT entities. Are we alone in consciousness? Exploring the beings behind the veil of consciousness with David J. Brown and Sarah Huntley. I believe they are talking about this specific research, so that should be interesting to check out. There is a linked video that has the video interviews with these folks. David J. Brown is the author of the Illustrated Field Guide to DMT Entities, Dreaming Wide Awake, Lucid Dreaming, Shamanic Healing, and Psychedelics, as well as the book, The New Science of Psychedelics at the Nexus of Culture, Consciousness, and Spirituality. He is also the co-author of 7 best-selling volumes of interviews with leading-edge thinkers. And so very interesting. I haven't had the chance to digest any of this, but again, as a follower of McKenna's, I am very curious to see where this is going. All right. Lastly, not really much to say about this, but I found it interesting that TheGuardian.com reported on it. Paranormal investigator dies on U.S. tour with allegedly haunted doll Annabelle. New England Society for Psychic Research announced the sudden death of Dan Rivera, 54, the organization's leader. Now, while I don't believe in the validity of haunted objects, and for a reason why, I would direct you to the work of the Newkirks, Greg and Dana Newkirk, and their traveling museum of the paranormal. And they used to talk about the haunted objects that they collect. They continue to collect haunted objects, but their ideas about the nature of their ideas about the nature of the paranormal, specifically haunting phenomena and specifically quote unquote haunted objects, has really evolved over time. And I think that they have really they have absolutely come to a very different opinion. Now, there's a lot about this case with this doll and why it was popularized as a haunted object. That's funny. I've seen different photos, and that is very different looking doll than the one I'm familiar with, but this is not my area of expertise. But anyway, you might find that of interest over at TheGuardian.com. Paranormal investigator dies on U.S. tour with allegedly haunted doll Annabelle. All right, folks, that's going to be it for now. Thank you for joining us. Please like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, drop your comments down below, whether you're listening to this or watching. We really appreciate your support. Please consider going to our Patreon and subscribing for free, or for $1 a month, $2 a month, or anything that you can give. Yeah, you can also just give via PayPal. Sorry to support the PayPal mafia, but hey, there's not much alternative out there. We do have a P.O. box. You can go to the website and there is a P.O. box there. Actually, I can put that up on screen, I think, somewhere. Where is it? Yes, there's a P.O. box. Anomaly Archives, P.O. Box 152252, Austin, Texas 78715. That is our mailing address here in Austin, Texas. That is Anomaly Archives, P.O. Box 152252, Austin, Texas, zip code 78715. Really appreciate your support. Thank you so much, folks. And good night.